February 2026. Super excited about today's class. It's going to be a great one for anyone getting started with drawing slash sketching, or for anyone who is having trouble kind of knowing where to start your drawings, or you're having trouble like communicating a sense of three-dimensional form and depth on our flat two-dimensional surface we're drawing on paper or canvas or walls or flat surfaces, right? And we want to communicate a sense of believable depth and three-dimensionality. So how do we do that, right? So if you're struggling with any of that, it's going to be a great one for you. As I was mentioning before, I am super passionate about giving you the knowledge and the tools, the skills that you actually need to build up artwork from scratch. And knowing how to draw is going to allow you to do that. Not only that, but you're going to be able to draw wherever you are, right? When I first started on my drawing journey or journey with art in general, I wanted to practice in a way that would allow me to go out to a park and sketch and paint whatever I had in front of me, or be able to sketch what I had in front of me at a coffee shop, right? Build something with a minimal amount of supplies, what I had on hand, and be able to draw and then move on to paint it and add detail if I wanted to, right? And not all types of practice will help you do that. You need to make sure that you know your goals and that you're practicing in a way that is going to get you to those goals. And sometimes the tutorials that you see online, they don't really give you those foundational skills that you need, okay? So very quickly into my journey, I realized that in order to be able to draw anything that I wanted, and to arrive at a believable three-dimensional look, like a sense of depth on my paper or canvas later on, I would have to develop the ability to not only understand that everything around me is three-dimensional, it has volume, it has mass, it is made up of different planes, some of which are facing the light and some of which are facing away from the light. But also, I would have to build up the skill to visualize what I was trying to draw as a simple three-dimensional form or a combination of simple three-dimensional forms, so that I could actually construct my drawing in a way that my preliminary sketch is already showing believable form and perspective before moving on to shading and adding detail. Because my friends, no amount of shading and detail is going to make something look believable if you don't stem from a foundational sketch that is effective. And in order to build a foundational line drawing that is effective, you need to already show a sense of form and perspective in that line drawing so that you have something to build on. It's like building a house. You wouldn't start adding the window panes and the glass and paint the house if the foundations are not effective and sound, right? It's the same thing. If you move on to adding shading and detail and textures and all of that, which a lot of beginners get very excited about, but your foundational drawing is not looking right, you're going to be very frustrated because you now spent 2-3 hours or more developing all of that on something that is not sound. And then you're going to have trouble fixing that, and to the point that it's going to be better for you to just start over, okay? So what I want to provide is the knowledge and the tools that you need to start a drawing right, with that construction process, with understanding what you're drawing as three-dimensional, okay? Now, I have taken many drawing classes, and many really skilled artists break it down into just 3 kind of essential three-dimensional forms that you should practice drawing, because what they believe is that any of the objects that you have around you, even the human head, okay, or anatomy in general, all of that can be broken down into one or a combination of these 3 simple forms. And these three simple forms that I learned in one of those classes, taught by one of these amazing artists, is the sphere, the rectangular prism, and the cylinder, okay? if you practice drawing those three solid, forms, simple forms in different angles and perspectives, and you understand how they are made up of different planes, for shortening, even. We're going to talk about those in just a bit. But if you understand those and you are able to draw them easily, you're going to set yourself up for success to be able to draw anything. Now, for me, I would also include a cone or even a triangular prism as well, because of, it'll give you an extra practice that will simplify some things. Because I have a lot of questions like, a bowl is not a sphere. How would you draw a bowl, right? Well, it's not like the objects are going to be, for example, I have this coffee mug in front of me, right? This is something between a cylinder and maybe a cone, right? Because it's a tapered cylinder, right? But if you know how to draw a cylinder, then it's just a matter of like distorting the lines a little bit and kind of, bending the lines in that cylinder a little bit, and it's going to turn into a successful form, right? So it's not black and white where you're going to keep the cylinder or the rectangular prism or the sphere exactly as is. Sometimes you're going to have to cut a piece off of that form or smush it or taper the edges a little bit more, right? But if you know how to draw these three solid, simple forms, you're going to be practicing what you need in order to be able to convert that cylinder or that sphere into a half a sphere or whatever you need a lot more successfully if you stem from these simple forms. Does that make sense? Okay. And sometimes, I think I said this in the beginning when I was just getting started, but like you have simple forms and you have compound forms or structures. Okay. Compound structures are made up of two or more simple forms. Okay. So, what can I have as an example? This mason jar right here. Okay. This is a compound structure. So this part of the jar I can simplify as, you see the circle down here because this is a base, but it's actually a little bit more like a rectangular prism because the edges, I don't know if you can see it there, but the edges of this are flatter over here, over here, over here, and over here. They are flatter, okay? And the base is the circle that is kind of on that. But I would see this more as a rectangular prism, and then I would round out the edges to turn it into more of this rounded out structure. But in my mind, I am stemming from seeing this more as a rectangular prism because of the flat edges. I am not seeing this as a cylinder. I would see this as a cylinder, okay, or maybe a cone. I would see this as a rectangular prism because of the flatter edges, okay? So you need to build the skill to simplify what you're observing. What can I see this as in order to simplify the drawing process for myself? Why? Because I need to get that solid three-dimensional form on my page looking right and in the right perspective before starting to develop any level of shading or detail. If the form and the perspective are not looking right, I should not be moving on to shading or detail or color work or anything, okay? Because it's not going to look right. Now, what I was mentioning about this mason jar, or whatever kind of jar it is, I don't know if that's the proper word, but like this upper part, this is a compound structure. This I would simplify initially as a rectangular prism. Then, as I said, I round out the edges wherever I need to, but after my rectangular prism is looking right, okay? And then this upper part right here is more cylindrical, is more of a perfect circle. See that? Okay. See how the edges of the rectangular prism are coming out a little bit out of the cylinder? Okay. So this, to me, if I were to draw this, I would simplify it as a rectangular prism with a cylinder attached at the top. Okay? So it's a combination of those two simple forms. And I would not concern myself with all of the little ridges and extra smaller plane changes within this rectangular prism and the cylinder at the top. Why? Because the smaller plane changes come after the bulk of the structure is set and sound. Okay? So many beginners get overwhelmed with the detail, but you need to build up like the skill to go through a process to build up your drawing successfully. And you do this by working on that's my chicken, sorry. You need to develop the skill to work from general to specific, large to small, okay? Focus on the larger plane changes first, and then once they are looking right, you can work on the smaller plane changes. Does that make sense? So we're gonna be working through a series of objects together. Sorry about that. My chicken usually is quite, she's usually silent, but she decided to go crazy right now. So we're gonna go through a series of objects together, okay? And first we're gonna start with a warm-up. I'm gonna teach you how to draw a sphere, a rectangular prism, and a cylinder. And then from there, we're gonna be working first on 6 man-made objects together. And then I'm going to explain how all of these principles work for organic objects, okay? Because I don't know if you've ever gone through classes on drawing flowers where you're first simplifying them as basic forms. It's the same idea. It's exactly the same idea. You start with a basic form, then you turn it into a flower. I'm gonna explain everything, no worries. Okay, great. So I think I have explained all of the things that I wanted to go through in this introduction. Let me go ahead and talk about the supplies that I have on hand, okay? Let me change my camera or add this other camera. Okay, great. So what I have with me today is a 9 by 12 inch sketchbook, okay? This is a regular 9 by 12 inch drawing sketchbook. I'm going to be using a couple of different pencil grades today. This is a 2B pencil and this is a 6B pencil, okay? Now, if I were drawing for myself on my own, if I were not teaching this class, I would start with an HB pencil or even an H if you like even harder pencil grades. On my YouTube channel, I have a video where I explain about basic drawing supplies and I talk about what different drawing pencil grades are and how different drawing pencil grades can come in handy throughout the drawing process. I would highly recommend checking that out. I have a full series of drawing videos for beginners where I explain my setup and different drawing pencil grades and all of that. All of that is available for you. But I would recommend having a harder pencil grade on hand and a softer pencil grade on hand so that you can start your drawing with your harder pencil grade and lighter lines. And then when things are looking okay, you can go ahead and switch to your softer pencil grade, all right? As I said, if I were starting my drawing just for myself, if this were personal practice, I would be starting with an HB pencil, and then I would be moving on to maybe a 4B pencil, or maybe even a 6B, whatever you like most. But I would just recommend keeping things really simple for today's practice and having a harder one and a softer one, okay? I have 2 different erasers on hand. This is a soft graphite eraser from a brand called Generals. It's one of my favorites. You can get them on Amazon and also Blick.com. Michaels also has them. And this is a kneadable eraser. I use these erasers for different things. Whenever I'm going to be erasing kind of a larger portion of my drawing, and with that I mean like a section of a line or a section of a shape, I use this one. And whenever I want to just lighten an area, maybe I want to remove some excess graphite that is floating around on the surface of my paper, I use my kneadable eraser, okay? Some people also use them to pull up some graphite from smaller areas by kind of manipulating the shape of your kneadable eraser and going in like this and erasing things out. To me, I would rather use something like a mono zero eraser, which is, let me actually show you what that is if you don't know what it is. I think my chicken is quiet now. Thank God. Okay. So this is a mono zero eraser. You can get it via Amazon or Blick. Okay. Whenever I want to go in and clean up an area that is very small, I would prefer going in with something like this than with a kneadable eraser, because a kneadable eraser is very flexible, it's very soft, and you're only going to be able to erase so much. It's not really that, you're not that in control, versus something like this provides more control and it's going to clean things up for you better. However, today we're not really focusing too much on details and shading and texture and that kind of thing, because as I said, we're focusing on the foundation of your drawing, on what I would recommend practicing a lot, so that, as I said, you have that skill to build up your drawing successfully. We're not so much focusing on shading and detail. So this is why I'm not bringing in the mono zero. But I do have my kneadable eraser on hand in case I need to lift up some graphite, okay? And finally, I also have this ruler on hand. I would recommend having a ruler on hand because I will be providing some little tips and tools to help you build more symmetry whenever you need more symmetry, okay? And whatever it is that you're drawing. Great. So let's go ahead and, yeah, Heather, yes, You can also turn your kneadable eraser into kind of like a cylindrical form like this, like a burrito, and then go over your drawing like this to lighten the entire thing if you want to lighten kind of a larger portion of it or the entire thing. Thanks so much for reminding me of that. All right, so hopefully all of that makes sense. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'm always happy to help. With all this said, let's go ahead and start our practice with our first object. And these are just simple objects that maybe some of you, at least most of them, are common everyday household objects. And it was very important for me to collect objects that are simple everyday objects for you, because this is how you build this skill, is by sketching anything and everything. You don't have to be looking for hours for like a super complex, beautiful subject to be able to build up your skills. The way to build up your skills is to draw often and to draw whatever you have around you. And once you practice and you have built up these skills to a solid level, a solid understanding via photos, I would recommend moving on to drawing them from life, from direct observation, because that is going to help you take your understanding of form and perspective even further. Okay, but for now, let me go ahead and hide myself from the screen and let's get to work. Let me pop up the first image. One sec. And the first image is going to be this bowl. Okay. Oh, yes. Okay. So I want to first, let me go ahead and remove this, because first I want to show you how to draw the simple forms. Okay. Let's do a bit of a warm up before moving on to the objects. I hope that's okay with you. All right. Okay. So as I said, the three basic three-dimensional forms that I would recommend practicing are the sphere, the rectangular prism, and the cylinder. And I would also move on to practicing the triangular prism and the cone. We will talk about those in just a bit, but these three will help set you up for success. If you don't know how to draw these three, from a variety of angles, you're going to struggle. End of story. Okay. You're going to continue struggling. So this is what you have to know, or at least what I would recommend starting with. And I would give you some tips on how to move forward if you want to take it further, or if you're struggling with anything specific. Okay. But these are the three forms. Okay. So first, let's start with a sphere. Okay. For a sphere, I would recommend practicing your circles. Okay. And this is the overhand grip that I am using right now. The overhand grip is where you're using your pencil like this and your hand is over your pencil. This allows the entire side of the tip of your pencil to come into contact with the paper as you're doing this motion. And as you can see, you create a soft kind of fuzzy effect, right? And I have an entire video on why drawing circles and ellipses is so challenging, and specific exercises. And that video over on my Patreon even has a handout. But I talk about why drawing circles and ellipses is so hard. And the gist of it is that you simply have to do it again and again to build up that hand-eye coordination, the motor memory. You simply have to draw circles and ellipses again and again. And for me, it really helps to kind of ghost. It's the method where your tip of your pencil is ever so slightly touching the paper. And before actually starting to sketch your circle, you're visualizing the path. You're visualizing the path that your pencil tip needs to touch to create that circle. Try it out. The larger the circle, the harder it's going to be to draw. But the only way to get better at your circles is to continue drawing circles. And something that really, really helps is drawing from the shoulder. As I'm doing this, the only thing that is coming into contact with my paper is this part of my pinky and sometimes this, but my entire forearm and elbow are off my table. I am drawing from the shoulder. If you try to draw a circle like this, okay, with just the wrist and the entirety of your forearm on your paper, you're going to struggle. Okay? You're going to struggle. Build up the skill to draw from the arm, and check out that video where I explain about different drawing pencil grips and why it's so important to draw on a tilted surface, because you need to, in order to build up the skill to draw from your arm, which is really going to help with your line quality and your shapes, you simply need to practice. Okay? Anyway, having said all that, a sphere starts with a circle. And then in order to make this look like an actual three-dimensional form, the way that you do this is you think of the orientation that you want the sphere to have, and you simply draw a couple of ellipses. We'll talk more about ellipses when we get to the cylinder, okay? That's an ellipse, and then not perfect. These are not perfect ellipses, okay? And maybe I shouldn't even call them ellipses, because ellipses are perfect by definition. Ellipses are like perfectly symmetrical ovals. Ellipses are ovals, but not all ovals are ellipses. It's a very technical term, okay? But essentially, this would be an ellipse, and this would be an ellipse. And then if I wanted to really make this pop, I can just go over, this is my softer pencil grade, by the way. This is my 6B. And I can just darken certain edges that I want to make pop out. Okay? Now let's just say that I want to change the orientation of the sphere. All I have to do is modify my ellipses, flip them, practice this, okay? This is going to help you build up that ability to visualize or to create a sense of depth and form on the page, okay? Practice opening up your ellipses more, squishing them more, right? And then changing the orientation of this cross, right? And that is going to make it so that your sphere is turning in a different way. Explore, as I said, the width or the size of these ellipses, make them larger, make them smaller, and also change the front cross, where it is falling within the circle. Let me go ahead and change to my softer pencil grade. 1 and 2. Okay, let's do another one. So if I have another circle here, I think this video on circles and ellipses that has the exercises, if you want to go through it, you can find it on my channel. Just type, there's this little search bar. I don't know if you guys know this, but when you go into a YouTube channel, there's a little search bar on top. You can type in circles or watercolor or, you know, whatever you want to learn about from that YouTube channel, and the results are going to like pop down for you, be displayed for you below. Okay. So if I want to change the ellipse, let's just say I want to make them even more wider, okay? Closer to the edges of that first circle. And gosh, I'm really like looking at this from a weird angle. I need to shift in my chair. And there's my other ellipse. And then I'm going to switch to my other pencil. I'm so happy the chicken got the chicken quieted down. My God, she's noisy when she wants to be. She was calm all morning, and then you start the class and she goes crazy. Okay, so there's another orientation for my sphere. All right. Great. So those are the spheres. Let me check if I have any questions, and then we can move on to the rectangular prism. Let's see. I seem to have no questions. Let me go ahead and have some coffee. All right, back to my 2B pencil. HB for you if you have one or something similar. Okay, so let's start with the rectangular prisms, okay? I'm gonna give you some tips on rectangular prisms. It's a very, very important form to know how to draw. So, all right. I like starting my rectangular prisms with the closest corner to us, okay, as the viewer. And then from here, we can go ahead and start drawing. Let me make this line a little bit shorter because it's gonna run into the other forms. And then I start building from that. So let's just say that this is my left plane of the rectangular prism. And then from here, I can build the right plane. This is the right plane. Then from here, I can build the left. You can use a ruler if you want. If your lines are still a little bit not straight enough, you can go ahead and use a ruler. It's totally fine. Okay, but so as you can see, I started with my side planes for my rectangular prism. And then from here, I can just build the upper plane by, you know, replicating this line and this line. It's the same angle. I make the same angle back here. I'm going to talk about foreshortening in just a bit. And then this line is parallel to this line, is parallel to this line, okay? That's how I would recommend starting with your rectangular prisms, by really noticing the parallel lines or the angles and replicating the angles, okay? So once again, this is parallel to this, is parallel to this. This is parallel to this, and that's parallel to this. And then you have these three verticals that remain vertical. Okay? Now, once you delve a little bit deeper into perspective, which I don't want to start overwhelming you or confusing you too much because I want to keep this very beginner friendly. But once you start understanding perspective more deeply, you learn about foreshortening and how in real life, like this already communicates a sense of form because of the planes there. But in real life, what most of the time happens is that you have some foreshortening going on. And in those cases, the verticals remain vertical, but all of a sudden, as planes recede away from you, they become shorter and shorter, right? So as the planes recede away from you and converge at vanishing points on either side, this plane becomes more and more narrow as it recedes away from you. Okay? That's what happens in real life. And my drawing here is not really showing that. It's already showing a sense of form. As I said, I would start here. But once you start understanding about 1, 2, and 3-point perspective and converging lines and vanishing points and all that, you start understanding that there should be a change in how tall these planes are as they recede away from you. So how would I do that? Well, I would start with that middle vertical again, or the closest vertical to you, and then simply make sure that your side planes are becoming at least a little bit more narrow, closer and closer together as they recede away. See that? See how they are becoming like closer together as they recede away. And then here, same thing. Even just a little bit goes a long way, okay, to communicate that believable sense of foreshortening. And then from here, we can close it. And there you go. Now, if you wanted to draw the inside lines, like if this were a glass box, what would those corners look like inside of that box? Well, this would be a vertical. Okay, verticals remain vertical. And then from here, you can just build the missing corners or edges of the planes. Okay, let's draw another one. So in these two cases, I'm seeing this upper plane, which means our head level is above these boxes. But what would happen if the box were above our head level? What would happen if the box is above us? We would no longer see the upper plane. We would see the bottom plane. So what happens in those cases? Again, start with the corner that is nearest you as the viewer of the scene. And then from here, instead of going up and angling my lines up, I would angle them down. Let me make this a little bit shorter so that it can fit in my page. I need to switch to a brand new page. Foreshorten them a little bit. Hold on, I'm going to angle them even more. Or shorten them a little bit. And then this one as well, angle it down, foreshorten it a little bit. You have this side plane and then this bottom plane. And there it is. Okay. So these are I'm just drawing these freehand as best as I can. And I'm sure they're not perfect, but they do communicate a sense of form. And I am utilizing my knowledge of perspective in order to communicate whether the form is above my eye level or below my eye level, right? Now we see the bottom plane of this box because it is floating above us, okay? Now, if you're struggling, like if you are trying to draw these and you're struggling and you're not quite understanding what I mean with my head level determining what I see, what planes I see in those boxes, there is, in my opinion, as a teacher, I have been teaching for over 15 years. And I also took classes on perspective and beginner architecture classes when I was in art school. So I know how hard this is. I was failing that course, believe me. But what I would recommend you do is start by practicing on 1 and 2 point perspective grids. Okay. I have those videos on my channel. You can type in the search box, type something like perspective, and I'm sure that video will be displayed for you. Okay. You need to practice on perspective grids because that it doesn't mean that you'll always have to draw your vanishing points and your converging lines in every single drawing, but starting with those exercises where you're actually drawing the horizon line and you're placing the vanishing points on either side, and then you're actually using a ruler to create your lines, right? I have all of these on my channel, you guys, okay? And you draw the grid. It's not really a grid, and sometimes you can only draw you can just draw the lines that you need. You don't have to draw the entire thing. But establishing your horizon line, which is your eye level, okay, and understanding that the vanishing points fall on the horizon line, at least in 2 point perspective. In 3 point perspective, there is one that is above or below that, but understanding that your vanishing points are always on the horizon line in 1 and 2 point perspective, and practicing using these lines as you're drawing your boxes, you guys, that is really, really important, because if you don't understand all of this, those exercises will help you really understand what a horizon line is, what a vanishing point is, how to use converging lines, and all that. So make sure that you practice on those quote unquote grids. Please, 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 because that will help you understand. Like when I am drawing these, I can draw these easily because I worked on grids for a while. And I can tell when something is looking off because I drew on grids, because I've practiced on grids so much. And because those exercises help me understand all of those key kind of topics and ideas, the vantage point, the eye level, horizon line, vanishing points, converging lines, transversal lines, all of that is very important, okay? And those, like, I actually take you through exercises where we're drawing rectangular prisms on those grids, okay? So check out those videos. They're available on YouTube and also on my Patreon, okay? Let's see. Okay, so now we're moving on to cylinders. Let's draw some cylinders together. Let's see. I think I have some questions. Let me go ahead and answer that. I always find the term form confusing. How do you distinguish a form from a shape? Okay, so Dennis, the difference between a shape and a form is that a shape is flat and two-dimensional, and a form is three-dimensional and is made up of multiple planes and has volume, okay? So when someone is first starting to draw and they're just kind of focusing on the outer edges of whatever it is that they're drawing, okay? Whatever it is, that is a flat shape. But when you start thinking of it in terms of planes, now all of a sudden the shape turns into a three-dimensional form because now it has mass, okay? Gosh, organic form. I shouldn't have done an organic form, but Does that make sense, Dennis? This is a shape, and it's cool to practice your shapes and proportions in the beginning, just focusing on the outer contours. But if you're really trying to communicate a sense of three-dimensional form, you need to start thinking in terms of planes. And that is what gives a shape a sense of mass, a sense of three-dimensional form and volume. Okay? All of a sudden, now that I see the side plane, it turns into a form, right? Same thing with same thing with the sphere that we were drawing. In the beginning, when I just drew the circle, it's a flat circle. It wasn't until I'm thinking of the roundness of the form and started creating that contour, that cross contour line to indicate that sense of three-dimensionality, that it now turns into a three-dimensional form. Does that make sense? A square is flat. A cube, this is a very beginner level cube. A cube is three-dimensional. A rectangle is flat. A rectangular prism, now that I'm seeing the planes, now it's three-dimensional. Now it's a form. Okay? Great. Let's see. Next question. Do you have a video where you explain how to find the eye level in an existing scene? I do, Heather. I have many videos on my channel and more extensive videos on my Patreon where I love drawing houses and scenes. And I explain, I even have one like fuller one on YouTube that I shared a while back where I am drawing a house off a reference photo in 2-point perspective, where in the beginning of that tutorial, I actually draw the converging lines and the horizon line over the photo. And then I move on to the step-by-step tutorial. I think you'll find it by typing in house in the little search bar. But if for some reason you cannot find it, please feel free to email me. You can find me at hello@ericalancaster.com, or if you're on Patreon, send me a private Patreon message, and I'd be super happy to send you the link, okay? My more kind of extensive and more challenging tutorials on perspective are available over on Patreon for the highest tier. They have all of my workshops on form and perspective are available for them alongside the other tutorials that the other tiers have access to. Okay, so let's move on to the cylinders. Okay, here is where I would recommend bringing in your ruler so that you can, a ruler is going to be very helpful so that you can achieve the symmetry present in cylinders. I know symmetry is very hard, but here's what I would suggest you start practicing, okay? So a cylinder is going to start with an ellipse at the top, okay? So we start with an ellipse. Just do your best and practice the exercises that I share in that video and you'll get better. But please know that your ellipses don't have to be 100% perfect. I'm sure mine are not 100% perfect. And also know that when I'm actually drawing, like say a full still life arrangement or a face or whatever it is, if you checked out my drawing tutorials in the past where you actually see me draw a full still life arrangement, I am using like blocky lines like this when I'm starting with my block in. So rarely do I ever go in and start my drawings with a perfect circle, okay? It's just that I need to explain this to you so that you know what you're looking at and trying to kind of recreate as you're starting a drawing. I hope that that makes sense, okay? Alrighty. Like what I need you to have in your head is what I'm trying to say. Still having trouble with the last rectangular prism, the bottom side. Okay. So let's see. Let's go back to this. Let me draw another one for you right here, Anna. Okay. So if you start with the middle, or not the middle one, the corner that is closest to you, right? And then when you're doing a rectangular prism that is above your head level, these go down. And Anna, nothing that I'm going to say to you right now is going to replace your need to work on those grids that I was talking about before. Because until you work on those grids, this is going to remain kind of fuzzy, okay? You need to work on those grids, but here it goes. Okay, so a little bit closer as I recede away. Working on those grids is going to help you do this intuitively, successfully, okay? And then you can visualize, Anna, this line right here. And in a 2-point perspective grid, this line, and this line would all converge at a vanishing point on the left, okay? And then this line, and this line would converge at a vanishing point on the right. There's a cat. And so if you, the vanishing point, by the way, would be somewhere down here. And this one would be off the page somewhere around here. Okay? So as I'm drawing all of these planes, I am visualizing the vanishing points in order to do that successfully. And that practice with the grids, Anna, is really going to help. But there is this bottom plane. I hope that that helped. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and work on those cylinders, you guys. So start with an ellipse at the top. And then what I would recommend doing is taking your ruler and maybe even just drawing like a little line in the middle before taking your ruler. But so ellipse, like a tick mark somewhere in the middle of your ellipse, and then take your ruler, align it with your tick mark. Use the edges of your paper here so that your ruler is straight. Okay, make sure that your ruler is as straight as possible. Otherwise, your line is going to be crooked. Draw a straight line. And having that vertical line there is going to help you with your symmetry. If I didn't have a straight line right there in the middle, I would really struggle with symmetry. Imagine this being a type of mirror. Okay, like a mirror, and there are two people on either side, right? And then this person over here, like both people are going to be doing the same thing, because like imagine it's the same person looking at herself in the mirror, right? And then whatever this side does, this side is going to do as well. Okay, I don't know why that helps my brain, but it does anyway. So having the middle vertical there is always going to help you achieve symmetry, because whatever shape you create over here in relation to this line, you need to flip it and recreate it over here. So let me explain. Let's just say that this part of my cylinder, let's use straight vertical lines all along the edges, and then I'll talk about foreshortening the same way that I did with the rectangular prisms, okay? This is the way that beginners learn how to draw cylinders, right? So I have my ellipse at the top, and I have the two edges of my cylinder, like so. Imperfect ellipse, but you know what I mean, okay? And then what happens with a cylinder is that you have to close it with another ellipse down here, okay? So if we're doing this very beginner level cylinder, I would recreate this same exact ellipse down here. And remember, I often see in beginners, they start their cylinder off right, and then at the bottom, they close it with a flat horizontal like this. This is going to throw off the sense of form. It's going to flatten things out, okay? This is not correct. A cylinder is a curved object, and so you should always, unless it's a flat, full profile view, you're always going to see at least a subtle curve here at the bottom, okay? And if you don't know what to do, try to recreate this curve down here. Whatever curve you have at the top, if it's a cylinder that you're seeing where the curve is, or the ellipse is more open, your two verticals, and then this curve, do your best to recreate it down here. Stay away from a flat line at the bottom because that's not going to communicate that round structure, okay? Whether it's a plant pot in the distance in front of a house, or tires in a car are also cylindrical, or your thermos. Whatever it is, there are so many cylindrical structures around us in real life. We need to remember that this would be an ellipse, okay? If the bottom of the cylinder looks flat, the top should look like that too. Yes. Okay, so you're talking about a cylinder that you're seeing in a flat profile view. Let me see if I have any cylinders here in my studio that I can use to explain. I should have probably brought something from downstairs. Hold on. So I have this candle. This is a cylinder, right? It's a cylindrical object. If you see the cylinder from the top, sorry, this is a little bit dirty. If you see the cylinder from the top, it's a perfect circle, right? This is a flat view of the cylinder. This is also a flat view of the cylinder because you only see the circle. You don't see any of the other planes that give a real sense of that this is a cylinder. You only see one plane. It's completely flat. It's a flat circle. When you start seeing the side planes, that's when you start getting oops, this is opening, sorry. When you start seeing the side planes, even like this, you start getting an understanding, hey, this is a cylinder. You start understanding, the more planes you're able to see, the more of an understanding you have of the actual structure you're looking at. This is just one plane. So if you try, and this is why sometimes if you just draw like a profile view or something like this, your drawing looks very flat. But if you start incorporating 3/4 views or more planes in your drawings, all of a sudden things are not looking that flat anymore. But anyway, Heather. So the camera is going to create a little bit of distortion, and also this cylinder is also pretty long, so that is not going to help very much. Maybe a shorter cylinder would help. Something like this. Oops. Something like this. Okay. So whenever you see, like, imagine a simple coffee mug, like just a cylindrical coffee mug that is not tapered, right? If it's at your head level, like, and you're just seeing the flat profile view, you will just see a rectangle, okay? Like, imagine you're in your kitchen or somewhere with shelves, okay? Imagine a tall, maybe like a bookshelf or something like that is taller than you, right? Now, imagine standing right in front of the shelf that is right at your head level. Okay, so you're standing right in front of a bookshelf and like a foot away from one shelf that is almost at your eye level, or maybe a little bit lower. If you place a cylindrical coffee mug on that shelf and it's right at your eye level, you're just going to see a rectangle. You're not going to see the upper plane or the bottom plane, right? You're just going to end up seeing a rectangle in a profile view. Sorry, I should use my other. In a profile view with a cylinder, you're only going to see a rectangle. But this is only when you're flat in front of it, right in front of your face. Does that make sense? The moment, if you, hi Paula, nice to see you. If you were to place that same coffee mug on one of the shelves that is below your eye level in that bookshelf, you're now all of a sudden going to see more of this until you place the coffee mug right at your feet. If the coffee mug is right, like you're standing and you place the coffee mug right on your feet and you look down, you're going to see a circle. You're going to see that. And it's also going to be a flat profile, a flat view because it's a top-down view, but it's still going to be a flat view because you're just seeing a circle. And here you're just seeing a rectangle. You're not seeing any planes. You're not seeing any more of that three-dimensional structure, if that makes sense. So all of a sudden, if you start rotating the object in space or you place it at a different kind of height in relation to you, to your head level, all of a sudden, what you're seeing is going to shift and change. Okay, your vantage point, which is where you are standing or where you're sitting in relation to the object or subject, is always going to impact what you're seeing. It's going to distort things, right? And as artists, you need to understand why that distortion is happening. Why am I seeing these planes? And why am I no longer seeing those other planes? Why is all of a sudden this plane of the structure becoming more like shorter and shorter or smaller and smaller? Why is this happening? It's because of perspective. It's because of your vantage point and your eye level, okay? Great. So I hope that makes sense. But yes, your comment, Heather, if the top of the cylinder looks flat, it is because you're looking at it at a profile view. And if the top of it is flat, then the bottom of it should be like a flat horizontal as well, more like this kind of thing, right? So the upper ellipse or line always has to coincide with the bottom one. Now, let me move this away because this candle is pretty heavy. Okay. Remember what I was mentioning before where many of us start our rectangular prisms like this, but then when you start delving deeper, you start understanding that the side planes have to at least become a little bit more kind of narrow as they recede away from you because of foreshortening. And by the way, foreshortening, if you've never heard this term before, it's simply when when you have an object and it is receding away from you, it becomes smaller and smaller, okay? And foreshortening is going to become more enhanced or more prominent if the object is longer and depending on how close you are to the object. Imagine someone is laying on a bed, okay? And you are standing at the what's the bottom of the bed called where your feet are? Let's say this is going to be horrible because I'm going to do this very fast. But let's just say that this is a bed and someone is laying down like so. I'm going to do a stick figure. Don't judge me. Okay. And you are standing here, observing this person from this angle. Okay. Their feet are going to be the closest part of their body to you, right? And because a human body has way more height than width, right? You're going to notice a lot of foreshortening. And the closer you are to the person's feet, which is the closest part of their body to you, the more foreshortening you're going to notice. The more, let's just say that you're very close to their feet. I wouldn't recommend that because maybe they smell. No, just kidding. But let's just say that their feet is right here and your head is very close to their feet. The foreshortening is going to be even more kind of extreme, if you will, than if you were standing a few feet away from the bed over here. But whatever the case may be, wherever you are, because of the length of the human body, this is always going to be a little bit larger than it usually would within human body proportions, because this part of the body is a lot closer to you than, say, the head. So no longer are human body proportions going to be respected. If you were to draw this perspective of a body, I have a full video where I explain about body proportions, but you know what I mean. Like, you're not going to go by, if the human body is 6.5 heads tall and so many heads should fit within the shoulders and so on and so forth, you cannot go by that so strictly, because the foreshortening is going to distort the proportions of the body. So now you're going to have to rely on your observational skills, on your visual measuring skills, and your understanding that things become distorted because of foreshortening as you're drawing that. Okay? But anyway, so here, this very long object, this is a cylinder. I have it here because I use it to kind of activate my watercolor and so on and so forth. But this is a cylinder, right? We know that if I were to place this in more of a profile view, these edges are parallel. But the moment that I start doing this, now we get foreshortening. Now this becomes more and more narrow as they recede away from you. And the closer I place this to the camera, which granted camera lenses distort things even more, the more enhanced the foreshortening is going to be. Notice that? Notice how extreme that is now. And the more that I get to profile view, the foreshortening disappears. Okay? So even if I do this, there's going to be at least some amount of foreshortening taking place. But the closer the object is to you and the longer it appears, the more those are going to slant. Does that make sense? So how do I do this? But conveying the foreshortening, or getting that foreshortening in place so that things can look even more realistic. Well, I would start with the ellipse at the top. You can make it as wide as you would like or as narrow as you would like, okay? And then I would do the exact same thing, maybe draw a tick mark or a vertical line somewhere around here. And then use your ruler and create a line right here. I am placing my ruler in such a way that it is parallel to the edge of my paper. It is always super helpful to use the edges of your paper as you are placing your ruler to ensure that it is straight, okay? Maybe you see it a little bit as like a curve because of the camera, but here in front of me, it is pretty parallel to the edge of my sketchbook. Okay, make it as long as you'd like. And then the difference is that these lines or these edges of the cylinder right here, I need to slant in a little bit, at least a little bit, if I want to communicate the foreshortening. These edges are no longer going to be parallel. I'm going to bring them in a little bit, okay? You can bring them in as much as you'd like or as little as you'd like, but at least I would say a few millimeters, like slant them in a few millimeters. And The challenging thing is that we need to flip that and make sure that the shape over here is exactly the same as this shape, only flipped. So it's going to be even harder. But let's just say, I should have used my 2B pencil, not my 6B. Let's just say that this is my edge on the left. Okay? Once I have this shape, well, I can't really call it a shape because I haven't closed it. But once I have that line, I'm going to try to replicate that same angle over here to the best of my abilities. Look at this middle vertical and remember that mirror that I was talking about before. And just try to get this in as best as you can. And just keep it light. If you keep it light, you need, and you want to change it later, you can easily erase it. Drawing is always a refinement process. You never have to get things right, correct right off the bat. Okay. Sometimes, most of the time, always. It's not until we have laid down our lines and shapes that we have that source of like comparison, right? We need to have things on the page in order to relate other lines and shapes with. It's not like we are geniuses and it's like beautiful mind where you're just drawing things perfectly right off the bat. Like not even the old masters expected themselves to do that. And you can check out their sketches online and see how they started with very light lines and shapes and then improved them as they went. Okay. Anyway, so I think these are looking relatively okay. I did my best to recreate this shape or this shape or this line over here. And then what happens is I just choose where to end my cylinder. And what happens with foreshortening is that this bottom ellipse is going to be a little bit more open or taller, whatever you like to call it, than this ellipse over here. So if this ellipse is this tall, I need to make sure that this bottom ellipse is at least a little bit taller than that. Why? Because this ellipse is lower to the ground than this ellipse. So it's all of a sudden more open. Remember what I was talking about before with the candle, right? Or the coffee mug? The lower the ellipse is to the ground, the more of that circle we're going to see. The higher up the ellipse is, the more squished it is. The lower to the ground it is, the more it has to open. Okay? Anna, planes, perspective, vantage point. Yes. Very, very important kind of terms there to understand. Okay. So let's just say, and this is a freehand sketch. I'm not going for perfection, but just understanding that this bottom ellipse has to be taller. I think should be the taller than this one. Okay. So I'm going to open up at least a little bit, make it a little bit taller. And I'm going to go over this with my softer pencil grade. And there you go. Now you have a cylinder that is a little bit more realistic, that shows that foreshortened look. Okay. And you can use the same process to practice your ellipses at your cylinders at different angles and perspectives. I would highly recommend that, because just practicing one single perspective or angle over and over again, it's good, but it's definitely like not going to set you up for success to draw anything. We really want to challenge ourselves if we want to get to that point so that we're ready. Okay, so let's just say that this cylinder is going to be at an angle there. So I'm going to do that little tick mark or line right in the middle. I take my ruler, align it to that, and I can no longer use the edges of my sketchbook in this case. I really need to be careful about making sure that my ruler is kind of like an axis here for this cylinder. And then I can go ahead and start drawing the edges of my cylinder as tapered, or I'm going to taper it more. I use this ruler with my X-Acto knife a lot because I'm constantly cutting watercolor paper, so I'm getting little wobbles when I'm using it for tracing. Need to be careful with that. And just do the same over here. And then I'm going to choose where to end the cylinder. And then if this cylinder at the top has this height, I want to make this cylinder at the bottom at least a little bit taller than that. And then I'm going to go ahead and create this cylinder. Wow, this perspective is difficult. I'm going to rotate. I cannot draw the ellipse with my sketchbook like that. I need to rotate it. Sorry about that. Okay, so now I can take my softer pencil grade, and there it is. Okay, but it's the same process. It's just that the axis changes, and I need to be careful with that axis because the slanted line makes the symmetry harder, but just do your best. And the more you practice, the better you're gonna, like, the easier it's gonna get. I promise. It's just a matter of practicing. Rotate it in your mind's eye and ask yourself, what would a cylinder look like from this perspective? Or what would a rectangular prism look like from this perspective? Or so on and so forth. Okay, so I just want to finish up before getting into our quicker object sketches. I just want to finish up by saying these three forms that I just walked you through, the sphere, the rectangular prism, and the cylinder, are what most highly skilled artists who are great at drawing will tell you that you absolutely need to know how to draw, okay? And then what I would add to this are triangular prisms and even cones, okay? But if you understand how to draw these, then drawing those is going to be a lot simpler. And something that I also kind of irks me a little bit is that people tell you, yes, you should draw a million boxes from all these different perspectives. Yes, but how does that apply to actually drawing objects or a scene or whatnot? That is what I teach you in my tutorials and what I'm going to show you how to do in just a moment, okay? You always, I really believe that as a teacher, you need to tell people or explain how to actually use this to draw something, okay? I have taught people how to draw the human head using the Loomis method. If you know the Loomis method, then you know that we start with a sphere and then like a secondary smaller structure, which is the jaw is connected to the sphere. And then the human body is also a collection of simple forms, right? The legs, the arms, you need to visualize those at least initially as simple forms so that you can understand the perspective of the different limbs and stuff, right? And then over that, you build the muscles and you build everything else. But absolutely everything is this, okay? Now I'm just going to very quickly tell you about like triangular prisms and cones, okay? I have another class on my YouTube, and I want to do another one because it's a recording of a live class that I taught for my Patreon like last year, I think in the beginning of last year, and it was so fun. I love that class where I teach you how to draw triangular prisms off photos of cakes and pies and like food objects because it's so fun to practice. But essentially, that is what a triangular prism is, okay? It's a triangle at the top, and then the sides are like a rectangle if you were to see them in a flat profile view. And let me see, okay. What would this look like from this perspective? Oh, this is very similar to this one. Let me change. To this angle here. And this is going to look like it's a little bit more from higher up. You know, just practice drawing these from all angles. That is a triangular prism, and then a cone. I'm gonna make some space here for a cone. A cone is essentially a cylinder that is completely tapered at the bottom, right? So you have the bottom of a cone is a circle, and when you see a circle in perspective, it's an ellipse, okay? So it's the same thing. But instead of having an open end, it closes. Oops, it's gonna reach this cylinder. There you go. And draw these from different angles. And fill up your sketchbook pages or large newspaper sheets with all sorts of different forms like that. Okay, let's see, I have another question. What about drawing the cylinder from underneath? You would just see a circle, Dennis, right? Because you would just see a circle. If you were to see, hold on, I think this other object shares it because this is transparent. So if this is what you're referring to, Dennis, the longer the cylinder is, the more distance there's going to be between the larger circle and the smaller circle at the bottom. And that means that if you were to draw a cylindrical object that is transparent like this, directly from underneath it, or like a top-down view, then you would see two circles, right? And the longer the object is, the smaller this bottom circle becomes. I hope that makes sense. So you would just draw two circles. But that is if you're directly above it or directly underneath it. Like, let's just say that you were laying down right under a glass coffee table, okay? And you have an object like this, maybe larger, that is right in front of your face, right? So you would see something like this. You would see two circles, one inside of the other one. Does that make sense, Dennis? Okay, so now hopefully you're a lot more, like, not only have we warmed up, but you have the knowledge to get started with many of these objects that we're going to be drawing together today. And yeah, so let's go ahead and get started with the first object, which is the bowl. So let's see, media and bowl. Okay, here it is. I'm going to start with my 2B pencil, eraser by my side, have a sip of coffee. So if I were to see this object, the first thing I ask myself is, what can I relate this object with? What kind of simple form can I use to build this object? To me, I would say a sphere, because maybe it's not a perfect sphere, but I can stem from a sphere. It's like half of a sphere, right? And that is what I have in my mind. And then if I want to like structure the box a little bit, or the bowl, sorry, a little bit more so that it looks like that, then I go ahead and refine the edges and the overall shape. But in my mind's eye, I'm immediately connecting this with one of my simple forms, okay? So we know that when it comes to objects that are curved, like the cylinder and the sphere, we immediately start with a curve or an ellipse or an oval, okay? So for this one, I'm going to try to fit in many objects into the same sketchbook page. So I'm just going to start right here in the upper left corner. I'm going to start with the ellipse at the top, the opening of the bowl. And you can see how lightly I am starting, okay? I always start my drawings very lightly so that I can keep them flexible and refine as I go, okay? But as I am drawing this ellipse, I'm thinking of the proportions of the ellipse right there. And what I mean by that is, how does the height relate to the width of this ellipse? Okay? Because if I start with an ellipse that is too squished, or I start with an ellipse that is too open, then the perspective of the bowl is not going to be the same as the one in the picture. And even though I'm not going for perfect, exact results, I am trying to make the proportions look a little bit similar to those of the object in the photo. So as you're starting with the ellipse, just make sure that the proportions of the ellipse are similar to what you're observing. Now, if you're just starting to build up your visual measuring skills, something that you can do, which I recommend my students do, is either print the reference photo and use a Sharpie or some kind of thick marker and draw tick marks right over the reference photo, or even trace an oval right along the edges of that opening over the photo, so that you can get an understanding of the proportions of that ellipse. Okay? If not, if you don't have a printer at home, you can also open up the reference photo in a photo editing software or even Canva or something like that, and then either place a couple of tick marks along the edges in Photoshop, or I have Affinity in my computer, and I think they even have like a free version nowadays. Draw a couple of tick marks right over the photo, because sometimes you just have to see it with your eyes, understand what you're looking at, and then try to replicate it. Okay? And that will help you start building up your observational skills and your visual measuring skills. Okay? All right. So once you have this, we already talked about how in cylinders, you would have kind of because the thing with this bowl is that at the bottom, it does have a circle, that cylindrical kind of little portion to it, right? So we already talked about how at the bottom, cylinders always have a curve, right? So I can start with a curve at the bottom, and then I can just build from there. So from here, can just start building. And then add that little base at the bottom, which is kind of a very short cylinder, which is curved here, curve over here. This is a sphere. Notice how I did this is very light, so you probably can't see it, but these are straight lines. This is what I call the block-in, okay? Where I draw a series of straight lines and I just bring them together to create that overall form that I want. But within this, I have in my mind that this is almost like half a sphere that I'm looking at. And if you want that little tool that I was talking about before to keep your object as symmetrical as possible, you can bring out your ruler, create a vertical line right here in the middle. And you can even do that before drawing your shape to make sure that things look as symmetrical as possible, right? And then you can go ahead and build both edges. But I wanted to share that about the straight lines because, as I said before, rarely do I start a drawing with perfect curves and stuff like that. However, I want to definitely explain about the ellipses and stuff because I have those ellipses in my mind as I am creating the series of straight lines around the ellipse, right? So, you don't ever really, unless you want to get really great at drawing circles and ellipses and stuff like that, you can definitely do that. But for me, when I'm creating a fuller drawing, rarely do I start my drawing with curves and perfect stuff. I start with my block in, which involves drawing or bringing together a series of straight lines. So I'm just saying this because I want you to know that you don't ever have to become super perfect at drawing circles and stuff like that, okay? Because a lot of people get very frustrated and think that they have to make things perfect and stuff. So you don't have to, unless you want to. And if so, practice with those exercises that I share in that video. Anyway, so that is essentially what the kind of construction portion of this drawing would look like. And from here, you can move on to refining things. You can erase the lines that you wouldn't really see. And once your proportions, your perspective, your three-dimensional form is looking okay, then you would move on to adding the details. Okay, so I'm not going to move on to shading these because this is not a class on shading. But let's just say that this bowl has like a little lip to it and maybe even like ridges and stuff. And if it did have ridges, which I don't know, this one is completely smooth, but if it did have ridges or a design, like a striped design or something like that, make sure that you're not flattening things out by adding the design with horizontal lines. That would also flatten things out, okay? If this were a bowl with stripes or ridges, then those stripes or those ridges would follow the three-dimensional structure of the bowl, which is curved, okay? See those as contour lines or cross contour lines that are following the structure. All right, great. Let's move on to our second object, and this is a coffee mug. Let me erase this. Let me check if I have any questions. Could I be moving through these a little bit quicker now that I've explained all about the 3D forms, okay? Let's see if I have any questions. This is not the chat. I clicked on the wrong thing. But what if you're not directly underneath? It's at an angle. Well, you would see this kind of thing. You would see that kind of thing. Dennis. If it's not directly underneath you, but it's at an angle, you would see something like that. Right? I would recommend, Dennis, actually placing yourself in that situation. Like, try it. Observe what happens. Like, what the best thing that you can do is actually like set up a little still life with 3 objects. Take photos or sketch from them from direct observation, but observe yourself. See what happens, okay? See how the forms become distorted, because you need to develop your observational skills yourself, okay? But whatever angle it is that you're viewing the cylinder from, the process of drawing it is the same, and the things that I shared with you are the same. But when it comes to the little subtle changes, the best thing that you can do is actually observe for yourself. Like, now that you know these things, move through your day-to-day life really paying attention to the forms around you, to the structures of your coffee mugs, of your shelves, or even your, I don't know, your cell phone or your heater or electric heater or your fan or your whatever it is. Really, really observe those and notice how what you're seeing changes depending on where you are in relation to the object. Observe those changes. Okay. Why do you consider this a sphere? That's a great question, Tracy. So something that I will say is we don't have to use the same simple forms as a base structure in order to arrive at a great looking drawing. For me, I may have used a sphere. Someone else maybe uses a cylinder or even a cone. And especially when you start getting into compound structures, which I believe I do have some compound structures in my little photos that I'm going to be sharing with you. Um, you like for some people, for example, I have a pear later that we're going to be sketching together. Some people would see the pear as a sphere with a little cone on top, and others would see that as a sphere with a cylinder at the top. And the fact of the matter is that it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter what simple forms you use. As long as you are acknowledging the thing as being a three-dimensional structure and the form that you choose is helping you arrive at a solid looking sketch with effective perspective, it doesn't really matter. Okay. So for me, this bowl, simply because of how wide it is over here and how kind of narrow, how it really, like for me, this sphere comes down at the bottom with a curve, and then it is on like an actual cylinder. But that is the way that I decided to visualize this. If you want to see this more as a cylinder, if it helps you see this more as a cylinder, it's perfectly fine. The way that it closes for me down here just resembles a little bit more of a sphere, if that makes sense. And then it is sitting on a very short cylinder, okay? But if you just want to like simplify this entire thing as a cylinder, like connect this part with this part and see it as a cylinder, that is perfectly fine as well. I hope that that makes sense. Anyway, okay, let's move on to our mug. So this mug is not, it's a little bit tapered. It's a tapered cylinder, very similar to my mug that I have beside me right now. So let's start with the ellipse at the top and let's pay attention to the proportions of that ellipse. I think it's a little bit more open than my previous ellipse. Notice how lightly I'm doing this. I'm doing this lightly, and then I'm going to compare this with the reference and see if I need to change that at all. I think it's relatively close, so I can keep it. Have a sip of coffee. My throat is getting a little bit parched. Okay. Here we go. So now that we have our little ellipse, if it's looking okay, now we can go ahead and start drawing the, you can do whatever works for you. It can be like a straight line here, like this would be a short axis in this ellipse. You can even just do like a tick mark, but I would recommend acknowledging where that middle vertical would be within your ellipse, because then you can go ahead and take your ruler, place it right over that line or tick mark. Make sure that your ruler is as straight as possible. And then you can go ahead and just draw probably a longer line than what you feel you will need. Is this too crooked? I think it's a little bit crooked. Let me draw this again. Okay. I think that's better. All right, so I would recommend drawing a line that is longer than what you feel you need, because it's better to make it longer and then just erase a section versus just making it too short and then having to add an extra section, right? Okay, so now that you have this, and we have acknowledged this as being a tapered cylinder, right? So I have a cylinder in my head. I am going to create another tick mark down here. Maybe, I think that's going to be a little bit too tall, maybe not so low, somewhere around there. Trying to get proportions that are similar to what I'm observing in the photo, right? And as you continue drawing and paying attention to this, your visual measuring skills will improve. But something that I would say to start asking yourself is like, how many times would this fit into this? Maybe 2.5 times, something like that. And that will help you get the total height from this edge to this edge relatively similar to what you're observing, right? So always be asking yourself, like, how many times would this fit into this? How does this width compare with this width? How does this length compare to this length? How does this angle compare to this angle? And so on and so forth. All those things are things that I'm constantly asking myself and have in my brain as I'm drawing, okay? It'll become more natural for you as you go. But anyway, so now that I have that, I can go ahead and just start drawing my edges of my cylinder and getting them relatively close to what I see there, but we'll refine in just a bit. Okay. I'm going to try to get these as symmetrical as I can. Let's see. Are they relatively symmetrical? I think they're relatively symmetrical. There we go. And down here, we know that we would have another ellipse, right? And if you don't want to draw the entire ellipse, you don't have to. But I have explained already that this would be a little bit more open, at least, than this cylinder at the top. Ellipse at the top, sorry. Right? We know that. But what's most important is that this bottom edge is curved and makes sense with what's going on over here. Because this one we wouldn't actually see. It's not a transparent mug, right? So I'm going to maybe erase this, or maybe you can just leave it in there, but make it lighter because you wouldn't actually be able to see that, right? Now that I have closed this plane or this side, for me, now that I have this extra point of comparison, I can tell that my mug is a little bit too tall when I compare it with the reference photo. No issues, okay? That is how we develop our observational skills. Continue comparing your sketch with the reference photo. So if you want to make it shorter, then just go ahead and bring up your curve, erase this bottom edge, and let's see if it looks a little bit better. But always coming back to the principles, right? We need a curve at the bottom that makes sense with the curve at the top, because this would be an ellipse, okay? I think it looks better now. So now that we have the bulk of the structure, right? General to specifics, large to small, if the bulk of the structure is looking okay, then we can go ahead and start adding in the handle. The handle is like a secondary structure that is attached to the main one. So you could see this as a compound form. It is, because it's two structures that are brought together, but it's relatively simple to get in. But you could also argue that this is also two structures brought together, because the base could be seen as a separate structure. Whatever the case may be, whenever I have an object that is primarily like one single form, I see it more as a single form, but we will get into more compound structures in just a bit. Okay. Anyway, so a lot of people have issues with the handles, and I totally understand, because when it comes to the handles, what happens is that there is this point where we see a twist in the handle. And if you have downloaded this reference photo and you can see it larger, it's going to be a lot more helpful for you. But the thing that happens with handles is that there is a point where you see the upper plane of the handle, and then the upper plane turns into the bottom plane. And then there is a section where you see the inside plane of the handle, and then you see the side plane, okay? So sometimes it's hard to see, but I would really, really recommend observe what is going on in the handle and really see it as the way that I see it, it's like a rectangular prism that has been bent and curved and stuck onto this main structure, okay, at the ends. So we have talked about how rectangular prisms have an upper plane, a bottom plane, side planes. You know, when a rectangular prism is made up of one, two, three, four, five, six sides. How many are they? I'm terrible at math. I think six sides. Okay. So now that we have practiced the rectangular prisms, imagine in your mind's eye having a very long rectangular prism that has been manipulated and bent into a curve and stuck onto the mug, okay, on either side. So now that you know that, practice looking at what is the top, what is the inner, what are the sides of that rectangular prism. And I know that it's hard because the handle is curved. It's not made up of flat planes. But it's very, very helpful when you're drawing to simplify things as having flat planes many times. In many cases, it's going to help you a lot. Okay, because our brains understand flat planes a lot more easily than curved, irregular structures. Okay, so if you simplify that as being made up of flat planes, it's going to help you understand what's upper plane, what's inner plane, and what's side plane. So now that we have this in, what I would personally do, especially because handles have more of an irregular shape to them, is just approach the handle with the block-in method, right? Bringing together a series of straight lines, just trying to get that in, which that would be the outer edge, by the way. And we will turn this into a three-dimensional structure by developing the planes, okay? So first you start with the outer contour, and then you punch a hole into that flat shape, and you create the inner edge, if you will, so that you have this negative space. This is a flat shape, but we're going to turn it into a three-dimensional structure by developing the planes that we see. Now let me go ahead and open up this photo because I myself am seeing the photo pretty small right now. I'm going to give you a couple of extra minutes maybe to draw that. Here it is. Okay. There we go. Nice and large. Yes, the rectangular prism has 6 sides to it. Is anyone out there as bad at math as I am? Math has always been like it freaks me out. Like I hear numbers and stuff like that and my brain just kind of tunes out. Anyway, so hopefully I gave you a little bit of extra time to draw that shape. Right now, as I said, this shape is very flat. It's just a flat shape that has been attached to this three-dimensional structure, so it looks weird, okay? But we're gonna now turn it into a form. So I have this photo of this mug opened up nice and large for me on my computer, and I can start seeing those twists that I was talking about before. And I want you to notice the value changes, because oftentimes value changes will tell you where planes change. Now, this mug is made up of a smooth, reflective ceramic material. So oftentimes you're going to see highlights and reflections that are going to throw you off. And this class is not about tones and values and shading. However, I mention this because oftentimes when you see a a sharp highlight, kind of noticeable, darker shape, all those things are a little hint, a little clue as to where those plane changes for the rectangular prism are happening. Okay? So if this is the outer contour, oftentimes you're going to see something like this. Let me get this in and then I'll explain. The side plane, and then you have something like this, where this part here is the inner plane. I'm just gonna shade that in for you so that I can better explain myself. But you even see like a darker blue value in this inner plane in the photo, if you notice carefully. That is the inner plane. And then this is where the twist that I was talking about happens. Okay, this is the side plane. And then all of this up here is the upper plane of the handle. Let me make this different values so that I can kind of make this easier to understand. Let's see if this is visible here. I'm glad I'm not the only one, Anna. I think my 3rd grade math teacher traumatized me. But that's a story for another day. Anyway, so this is the twist that I was talking about, where oftentimes, and this is not going to happen exactly the same with every single mug, you need to observe what is happening in front of you, okay? But almost always, you're going to see this situation where you see a bit of the upper plane and then it disappears. And then you see a bit of the inner plane and it disappears. And then you see the side plane. So hopefully, now that I have kind of separated the planes out, and this is not perfect by any means, but at least now I have more of a 3-dimensional look. Why? Because I have turned a flat shape into a 3-dimensional form by simply establishing plane changes. But observe, practice your observational skills. That is the best thing that you can do, and see how these principles apply to what is going on in front of you. Okay, it's never going to be exactly the same. But having these tools and this information is going to help you understand what to look at and why things are looking the way that they do. You're going to have a side plane, you're going to have an upper plane, and you're going to have an inner plane. And hopefully now you can kind of understand how this is just a long rectangular prism, a slim, narrow kind of rectangular prism. Wow, long straight lines are hard. Okay, so imagine having a long strip like this, a long rectangular prism that has been bent into this shape or form and stuck onto this main structure. And so because you see it as being a rectangular prism from the start, you understand that it is made up of different planes, right? Some of which are facing away from the light and some of which are facing toward the light. Okay. So again, just as what I was explaining with the bowl, it's really helpful to sit with your reference photos, print them out, and kind of draw lines in something like this so that you can understand the different planes. Alrighty. Awesome. So let's go ahead and change. Well, let me just do my final kind of dark or contrast of this mug before moving on to the next object. This is my softer pencil grade, and I'm just gonna go in and not really trying to shade or add too much detail, but just making this look a little bit more finalized, if you will. And of course, in realism, you will lose edges, okay, to your planes. You won't see the edges as clearly as what I drew here, but I wanted to draw them so that you understand what I'm trying to explain more clearly. Like, you won't see lines like this in realism, okay? But you can lose some edges, and even just making some softer will create more realistic results if you want to, or just keep it as a simple line drawing. Uh, if you want to attach this in a clear way, then maybe bring in this secondary structure a little bit more into the main structure, as opposed to just keeping it like very flat coming outside, or just like coming outside of the edge. Bring it in a little bit if that's what you see in the photo, right? Otherwise, that can also be an issue that leads to flatness. And by the way, as well, like, I didn't do this, but if you want to round out this section a little bit more, you can totally do that, okay? Here at the bottom, instead of keeping it like a straight line, because we did use a ruler, you can do that. Or change the shape a little bit. If you want to pull this out and then bring it in, like, you can always kind of manipulate what you're doing, but I would definitely recommend doing that. Like, whatever you want to change in your bulk main part of the structure, try to do that before adding in the handle, because otherwise, if I try to fix this now, I'm going to have to redo the handle, you know? So this is one of the reasons why it's always so important to work large to small, general towards specific, because then you kind of put yourself in the situation where things are just harder to fix, or you end up wasting a lot of time. All right, let me check on questions and also change to my next photo. Let's see. I have noticed that when trying to draw a cute coffee cup, now I'm going to see. Oh, I have noticed that I'm going to see the coffee handle differently with a better under. Yes, I'm so glad to hear that, Anna. Yeah, handles are almost always challenging, even for me. I need to really slow down and pay attention to what is going on. But that's kind of the gist of what to look at, and also what I have in my brain. I'm gonna sharpen my pencil. Okay, so we have this pitcher. Is pitcher the right word? I'm not super sure. Jarra is what we call them here in Mexico. Okay, so starting with my 2B pencil, and this I would definitely see as a tapered cylinder as well, with another handle. This handle is not as curved, but I would approach this handle in exactly the same way that I approached this one, first with a flat block-in, and then I would turn that into more of a three-dimensional form by just kind of building the planes, okay? And this one also has that little spout, so we have to add that as well. But I wouldn't add the spout in the beginning or from the beginning. I would first get the bulk of the structure in, and then once that's looking okay, I would add the spout and then the handle, okay? So ignore the spout. Try to just observe the cylinder the ellipse in that cylinder at the top, okay? Tune the spout out and just try to recreate the ellipse. So start out. I think this is going to be too large. It's not going to fit if I make it that large. I'm just going to make it a little bit smaller, and hopefully this will fit. I may have to make this a little bit shorter than the proportions in the photo. but I really want to fit in at least 3 objects in this sketchbook page. Okay, so my ellipse is in. Is this looking okay? Do I need to open it more? Does it need to be a little bit taller? How does the height relate with the width? I think that's okay. Okay, so now that I have this, I'm gonna go ahead and use my little vertical line to help me create that symmetry. The taller the object, the harder it is to draw or create symmetry. The larger the shapes, the harder they are to draw. So that's normal, okay? Even for me, the longer the line, the harder it is. You're not weird if you or lacking any talent or something like that if you find it difficult, okay? All right, so now that I have that line, and I try to make it longer, but I am running out of space over here. So make it longer than what you feel you need if you have the space. And so now that I have this vertical line right down the middle, I'm gonna go ahead and try to recreate the angles that I see along the edges. So it's not a super steep angle, but it is there. So I'm gonna try to place my ruler in such a way that I feel the angle will be similar. I think I need to do a steeper angle. So I'm gonna erase this and do this again. Make it even more prominent. Compare it with the reference photo. I think that's better. Picture is the correct word. Okay, I'm glad. Okay, so now that I have this in, I'm gonna try to recreate the same angle but flipped on this other side. Oh, I have a question or something. Okay, let's see. It's been 30 years since I've been in a real drawing class. When I drew the bull, it looked wonky. As soon as I put the center line, I could see it wasn't symmetrical. I'm glad that central line helped. Yes, it's very, very helpful. It's artists call this kind of line a plumb line. And it's, even if you're more advanced, it's very likely that you will continue using plumb lines because they help with symmetry, they help with alignment. Portrait artists, for example, use plumb lines all the time to make sure facial features are where they should be and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a very, very important tool. Okay, so that is a little bit asymmetrical to me. I am going to fix this line. I notice that my line needs to be a little bit less angled over here. I'm going to correct that. I think that's better. So now this shape here on the left is more similar to this shape here on the right. And then I'm going to go ahead and sometimes I really like starting with just a tick mark to visualize where I want the edge of the ellipse to be or to fall or reach. And other times I just go right in and draw the curve. Okay, it depends how long you want to spend on your drawing and how close you want it to be to the reference and so on and so forth. But I use tick marks and plumb lines all the time in my drawing, okay? Anyway, so we know that this ellipse down here should be a little bit more open than the ellipse at the top, but we don't really see this part at the back, right? Because this material is not transparent. So I'm just going to try to get in this bottom curve as best as I can. Observe the reference photo, continue observing, and make sure that you, like, even if you are just drawing this part of the ellipse, visualize in your mind's eye and always remember that this is an ellipse. This is a complete ellipse. If you were to turn that picture upside down, that bottom would be a perfect circle. And remember, circles in perspective are ellipses. Okay? Great. So maybe my bulk of the structure here is a little bit like shorter than the reference photo, but I'm gonna leave it like this because I am running out of space. And it's pretty close. So once this is looking okay, I would go ahead and add the spout, which you could see the spout as an extra little structure if you wanted to. It would help, but it's hollow, you know? So if what structure would the spout be? It's kind of like a pyramid that is attached to the cylinder, right? It's a little pyramid. We only see a side of that pyramid and it's hollow. It's not like a closed form, but the cylinder is hollow as well. It doesn't have a top plane. It has a hole, but it's still a cylinder. So for me, the form that I can kind of relate the spout with is a pyramid that is attached to the cylinder. So a pyramid is made up of triangles, triangular planes, right? So as I am drawing the spout, I have that pyramidal structure in mind. So this is the plane that we're able to see of that pyramid. And then we see this upper plane, if you want to see it as a plane. It's an opening, it's hollow. But you could see this as the upper plane, the same way that you could see this as the upper plane of the cylinder, right? And that's what it is, right? I'm just building on my base structure here. And you could see this, if you wanted to, as a combination of three forms. The base structure, which is the cylinder, the secondary structure, which is the spout, which is like a pyramid, and this third structure, which is the handle, which is like that long rectangular prism that is kind of bent into this form. A pyramid is different from a triangular prism, by the way. A pyramid is more so pointy at the top, where there's kind of this going on. Whereas a triangular prism, I should definitely do another one of those drawing cakes and pies class, because it's a super fun way to practice triangular prisms, especially, and also cylinders, because cakes can be seen as cylinders. This is a triangular prism. This is a pyramid. So they are different. This is more of a pyramid. All right. I should have probably not drawn those there, because where am I going to draw the handle? This is a triangular prism, Anna, and this is a pyramid. See the difference? A triangle is a flat shape, and a triangular prism is a three-dimensional form. Remember that the difference between a shape and a form is that a shape is flat and a form is three-dimensional. So every shape, every flat shape has its equivalent in 3D form. A square is a cube, a rectangle is a rectangular prism, a triangle is a triangular prism, could also be a pyramid though. A circle is a sphere, and so on and so forth. Does that make sense? Okay. So I'm gonna erase this because I need to draw the handle, and I'm gonna start the handle the exact same way that I started the handle for this mug over here. First, starting with the outer edge, the outer contour, and focusing on overall proportions. And then I can go ahead and turn it into more of a three-dimensional form. Okay, let's see. What does this look like? This tapers in and it ends somewhere around here. Has a slant to it, gentle slant over here. And just like with this handle, I am thinking of where it is connected into the structure and how the height of this relates to the total height of the structure. Okay. And it's just the outer edge. Okay. I'm not thinking of individual planes just yet. We have a sip of coffee here. Okay. All right. So now that you have this, we're going to punch that hole into this shape to create, it's still going to look like a flat shape, but I need that negative space here. So what does this look like? Kind of something like that. This is definitely a more angular handle than this handle over here, but it's still curved. It still has like soft curves to it. It's not pointy, if you will. Now let me go ahead and open this larger view so that I can see what's going on in the handle larger. Okay. Once you have this, it's a matter of breaking it up into planes. So just like with this handle over here with the mug, ask yourself, what is upper plane? What is side plane? And what is inner plane? Or bottom plane, if you want to call it bottom plane. Interior plane. Okay, what planes are facing toward the picture? What planes are facing toward the light? And what planes are facing toward us? So for this, there is this plane here at the top, and we see that twist. Remember the twist? Not the dance. This is the top plane right here, and it ends somewhere around here. And we see the side plane. There's a very narrow side plane that you can sketch in that can help separate the upper plane from the interior plane. It's very narrow. It's the narrow side of the rectangular prism. Okay. Probably my Mono Zero would come in handy right now to clean up this for you so that you can see this better. There it is. And then this here is the interior plane. Let me make it darker so that there is a difference in tone so that you can see this better. Right? This very narrow plane is what I'm referring to as the side plane, which would be this very narrow part of the rectangular prism. Right? Now, that would be the essential structure done, okay? Once you have the essential structure for whatever it is that you're drawing, if you want to go ahead and add more detail, remember that anything you add on the surface of this structure, which is curved, should be curved. You cannot start adding designs like this because you're going to flatten out the form. You're going to flatten it out. You have to remember this: texture follows form. Texture follows form. Whether it's visual texture or tactile texture that you're trying to add to your sketch, you should always follow the form, okay? Otherwise, you're going to flatten things out. So this one has these kind of vertical lines to it. And by the way, if you were to add these vertical lines, you also want to make them a little bit slanted, because if you don't, you're going to also flatten things out. Remember how these lines on the edges are tapering in, right? So if the edges are tapering in and you start drawing vertical lines like this, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. If you're telling me that the edges are slanted, then the lines inside of this also have to be slanted, except for maybe the one in the middle, okay? But the lines, if you're going to be adding vertical lines, like a vertical design of sorts, they have to be slanted, and then they become less slanted as they get closer to the middle vertical, and then they become slanted in the opposite direction. But they have to fit within this and this, okay? Texture follows form. Remember that. All right. Great. So there's that picture done. I'm going to leave it like that. And let's move on to the next object, object number 4, and see how these same principles apply to this. We're getting into rectangular prisms now. Ooh, what are we going to do now? Oh my goodness. I'm going to change to a new page. Okay. I'm going to open up my window a little bit. I think the sun should not be as stark anymore. It was super stark before in my face. All right, okay. Okay, so we have this perfume bottle, very fancy. I'm gonna start with my 2B pencil. And first, we sit with the photo and we ask ourselves a few questions. What can I simplify this object as? What combination of simple forms is it made of? And maybe even like how is it related, or how does your eye level relate to what you're observing? Or is it below your eye level or above your eye level, right? So when I see this, I immediately acknowledge it as being a combination of rectangular prisms. I see 2 prominent rectangular prisms, a larger one and a smaller one at the top. And I can barely see that little neck portion, the gold portion. I think there is a cylinder there. The little spritzer part of the bottle would be a cylinder, but it's almost completely covered by, like, it is inside. Most of the cylinder is inside of the rectangular prism at the top, okay? So the most important structures here are still rectangular prisms, though I'm sure that if I were to see this perfume bottle in more of a profile view, I would see more of that neck, more of the cylinder. From this perspective, which is a little bit below our eye level, we can't see much of the cylinder. I see a little curve there, which is definitely an indication that there is a cylinder there. The base of it is a curve, which tells me that that is a cylinder, okay? But I cannot see like the actual cylinder, like the if I were to just see this as the outer contours, I don't see the cylinder. The cylinder is part of what I'm going to add after doing the rectangular prisms and having them in. Then I go ahead and add in that little indication of the cylinder. But the rectangular prisms are the most prominent structures, so we need to start there. And then I ask myself, which is the largest rectangular prism? It's the base of the bottle. So I'm going to start with that. And then I add the other rectangular prism at the top. So how do we start with this? Remember how we start those rectangular prisms? Remember how we start with the corner that is nearest us, right? And then we can go ahead and replicate the angles as best as we can for the two side planes. Now, this is also one of those situations where if you're finding this very difficult, print out the reference photo, draw over the reference photo, and notice those angles. It's going to help you improve your observational skills. Sometimes it's hard to see those edges. Okay, it's hard to see this upper edge, for example. It's glass, it's reflective. You know, there are many like value changes, tonal changes, and even hue changes happening, and it's hard to see. But printing out the reference photo and drawing over it is going to help you understand where those edges are happening, and that gives you your lines. Okay? So let's do this one over here. And this line here. Remember that they should be close to parallel. I know that we talked about foreshortening and how these become like more and more, like shorter and shorter, smaller and smaller as they recede away from us. This is 2-point perspective. But if you're just stem from having them be parallels, especially because this is a smaller object, and just go from there, okay? Keep your verticals vertical. Okay. And then from here, from my understanding of rectangular prisms, I can close this even though I can't see edges. You're not going to see edges all of the time. It's not going to be clear for you, okay? But knowing how to draw rectangular prisms is going to help you do things intuitively and arrive at believable results, even like complete the structure, even if you can't fully see it. If I didn't know how to draw rectangular prisms, I wouldn't be able to draw them as easily. I wouldn't be able to complete it. I wouldn't be able to make up for the information that I'm lacking. And this is why it's so important to practice these forms on their own. Okay? Great. So I would say that this is, sorry, pretty similar to what I'm observing there in terms of proportions. And from here, I can go ahead and start with a smaller rectangular prism. It's very hard to see this, and let me go ahead and open my larger photo here, see this more clearly. This is a transparent kind of not plastic, maybe glass. Maybe this is plastic at the top, whatever it is. It's transparent, and it's, again, hard to see the edge. But what I would say is try to locate that edge in relation to this edge here that we started the bottom largest rectangular prism with. It's definitely more to the right. And we're still starting with the closest corner of that rectangular prism to us as the viewer of the scene, okay? Once that vertical is in, you can go ahead and draw the other two verticals on either side. It doesn't matter if you have to erase a section, okay? I just want to make sure that I understand the dimensions of this rectangular prism in relation to this one beneath it. And placing these three verticals is going to help me start sorting that out in my head, okay? But we once again started with the verticals, okay? Nothing new. From here, I can go ahead and close that. Observe where this bottom edge sits in relation to this edge. And where this bottom edge here sits in relation to this edge. And try to keep things parallel, okay? And from here, I can start closing this smaller rectangular prism. And what's hard about compound structures like this is that it really needs to feel like this is sitting on top of this, and it needs to look like they are both being seen at the same perspective. Sometimes some rectangular prisms can seem like they are tilting, and that means that there's something wrong with your planes. Okay? Just gonna close this here. Check on your angles. I'm gonna tell you my parallels in just a moment. Erase my long lines and maybe soften the look of this back edge. Okay, so let me explain about my parallels here. Okay, so this is parallel to this, and this, and this, and this. Those are all parallel. Parallel, parallel, parallel. My verticals are all parallel. And then this shape here needs to be similar to this shape here, only larger. If one of these is very, like, let's just say one of these is kind of like that, and then the other one is like that, the perspective is not the same. All right. Let's just say that this is the top plane of this larger rectangular prism, and this is the top plane of this rectangular prism. The perspective is not the same. It's going to look off. It has to look like this is sitting over this. So they have to be very similar. How do you make them similar? By using lines that are parallel. This line, these two lines are not parallel to this. If you've never heard the term parallel before, parallel lines are lines that could go off into infinity and never cross or never touch. These lines are not parallel. If I were to extend these lines, they would cross. Okay, see how that would cross? This would eventually cross with this. So if you do something like this, it will look like your planes are tilting in different ways, and the perspective is not going to be the same, or at least you won't communicate the sense of one rectangular prism sitting on another rectangular prism. Okay? Great. So let me just go ahead and soften this again and erase this. If you have any questions, let me know. I'd be happy to help. And I'm just going to add that little curve for the very, very small golden ellipse, or sorry, cylinder. My brain is getting tired. Okay. So for the little neck, all I need to make sure to do is add a curve here. Now, the neck is supposed to look like it is sitting in the center of this top plane of the bottom rectangular prism, not in the edge. I have to make it look like it's centered on that plane, right? So be careful with that. Observe, where is that curve happening? And does it look like it's centered? Otherwise, how should you move it, right? If I wanted to make this look like it is transparent and you can actually see a little bit of that like golden spritzer thingy, then just add a little bit of loose detail there so that it looks like it's see-through. I would make those lines or shapes lighter so that I can actually communicate in a sense that that is see-through, the material is see-through. But I wouldn't want this cylinder to compete too much with the purple block around it. And if you wanted to draw the base, because this is glass, I know that you can't really see it super clearly because glass is always going to create like a distortion, but that's what you would see. I'm gonna give you a couple of minutes, have a little bit of coffee. And if you have any questions, let me know. By the way, everything that we've been doing so far is construction. We are constructing three-dimensional objects. And this construction process is what I always recommend beginners who are just starting to draw focus on, like the majority of their drawing practice, because this will set you up for success so that you're able to build up effective drawings and draw pretty much anything. Okay. Um, a lot of beginners, in my opinion, make this huge mistake, which is they spend too long on one single drawing as opposed to drawing a variety of objects, following the same principles, using the same tools. And the thing about just spending too long on one single drawing is that you only go through the process once and you only go through this construction part of the process, which is so important, once. And you spend too long shading and adding detail over something that is not successful, it's not effective, and you end up wasting so much time. So for me, when I'm just getting started with a new student, it's draw 10 objects for homework, starting with this construction process. And then if you want to, if you have extra time, then go ahead and add shading and more detail. Okay. But I want you to really focus on this. It's really, really what I would recommend. All right. So I seem to have no more questions. Let's move on to the next object. This is, getting a little bit harder now. Let's see. Yeah, Anna, it's a lot. I know that this can be a lot, but it's so important that you know all these things, you know? And I never want to teach things just like partially. Like I think it's unfortunately an issue, especially nowadays with videos that are so short, is that they just teach you part of the process and they leave you with more questions than answers. Like you went in with a question and you end up with 10. You end the video with 10 questions. Like, and that's part of the thing, is that drawing is complex. I want to make sure that I simplify this as much as possible for you, but I don't want to leave important parts of the process and important just pieces of information out, because it's important that you move on with this in mind, and it's going to help you move forward faster. Okay. So new one. So when I see this structure, what comes to my mind is a pyramid. And I know that it has teeny tiny little legs. I can't really see what they are, if they are little teeny tiny cylinders or rectangular prisms. We don't know, but what's most important is to get the bulk of the structure in, right? And we know that this is This can be simplified essentially as a pyramid. Try not to get distracted by the little metal part on the side and the little feet and the little, I don't know this is a music, is it a metronome? Is that the proper term? I'm not sure. Try not to get confused by the things in the center, by the fact that the pyramid is like cut into, okay? We're just drawing this as a simple pyramid first. So how do we do that? Let's start with the angles, and I'm just going to try to replicate this freehand as best as I can. If you want to help yourself with a ruler, feel free to do that. Metronome, yes. Okay. So here we have another one. And then we have another corner of this pyramid, which would be somewhere around here. Try to notice the angles. Pyramids can be tricky, but we see more of the front of the metronome than the side of it, right? So this triangle over here for the front plane should be wider than this side plane. I think maybe this should be a little bit more slanted. And this is another situation where it's so helpful to draw lines over the reference to really understand those angles. Okay. You don't have to close the pyramid. I mean, you could just do this and draw the entire pyramid, but since we're going to be cutting into it, and this is actually a shorter, kind of smushed pyramid at the top. But what I'm getting at is you don't have to add that in right now. Just focus on the bulk of this first, okay? I'm still visualizing this as a pyramid. It's just that the very top of it is kind of like cropped off. And do observe the change in angle. The edge of this front plane over here at the top has one angle, and then it changes over here and becomes a little bit slanted over here in the side plane, okay? Don't keep it the same angle. And then use this angle as you're closing this at the bottom. And use this angle as you're closing this at the bottom. Thanks, Heather. Yes, it's a metronome. I forget the name. Okay, so parallel, 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 and parallel. You can refine if you need to, straighten out lines if you need to, whatever you need to do. And practice drawing lightly so that you can keep your drawing flexible in the beginning and refine as you go. It's very important. And we know that pyramids have this like a square at the bottom. If you were to turn a pyramid upside down, it would be a square. Or a rectangle. It can also be like a rectangle, I guess. But you would see something like this. If this were see-through, what would those planes look like? Parallel, 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 parallel. Okay? So that is looking okay to me in terms of proportions, and the form looks sound, perspective looks okay. Now, if things are looking okay, we can go ahead and add in any smaller details. If you want to add in the more like smushed pyramid at the top, it's very small. Um, I would just look at those planes and try to make it look centered on on this kind of larger pyramid at the top, at the bottom, centered on it. The point right here should look centered within the structure, right? And it's coming out a little bit, so you could extend it, just extend these lines if you want to make it look more like that small pyramid in the reference. And then from here, you can just add in the rest of the details. So these objects usually have like a little door or lid to them that protects this part. So it's been removed in this case. So what we see is this section, which is kind of the interior of it. So it's kind of like the pyramid has a section cut out. The way that I create that effect is by simply bringing this part out a little bit. It's the same edge. I just recreated that same section, brought it out a little bit more. So that this entire part can be the wooden part down here. This is also the reddish wooden part here. And then the actual metronome mechanism, or whatever you want to call it, would be here. And that is not, it's not a vertical shape. Okay, it goes kind of like this. Notice those angles as best as you can. It's not a perfect vertical. I don't want to make it look tapered. Spend as long as you need to with each part of the sketch before moving forward. Don't rush the process. Okay. So see, it's really just a matter of like making the line a little bit longer and bringing your same lines out or down. If you want to make things look a little bit wider than the base structure, just pull out those lines a little bit. Should probably erase this line here. And this actually connects with this. Just refining my drawing a little bit. Let me know if you have any questions. We're about to move on to the last man-made object, and then we'll quickly do a couple of organic ones so that you can see how these same principles apply to organic objects when drawing organic objects. Have an edge. Then it comes down, and this goes all the way across. How does this connect? This one is definitely challenging. That's why I save these for last. I try to start with the simpler ones and then move on to the more challenging ones. Um, okay, the little tiny legs that I see there, how are they positioned within this? And I don't see the other one. I just see a little bit of the shadow. All right, awesome. Let's go ahead and work on the last man-made object. And then we'll move on to the organic ones. Okay. Ooh, a lava lamp. So this one is like a collection of cones, or you could see them as tapered cylinders, whatever is easiest for you. And what's super cool about lava lamps is that they are, some of these cones are upside down, right? Uh, I would, you could see this as four separate cones, or you could see it as three separate cones. And it's totally up to you. Whatever is easiest for you is fine. Whatever helps you move through the process more easily is totally fine. You can decide how many cones to break this up into. I would say, for me personally, if I can break it up into fewer forms, I will. And then if I just need to like break up certain parts with a line or detail later, I can do that later. So for this one, we have a situation where this is my 2B pencil, and I have the thing about this particular lava lamp as well is that it is very much almost like a profile view. As you can see, we can barely notice the curve here at the top. Do you see that? That we can't really see a curve at the top. And even where the orange part ends, we almost see almost like a flat horizontal there. Do you notice that? We don't really see curves. The bottom part does have a curve. The base of the lava lamp does have a curve. Why? Because it's a relatively tall object, and these bottom cones are below our eye level. So the bottom ellipse becomes more open, and so we see more of that curve. But the upper cone is kind of at eye level, and this is why we don't see the curves. The top edge, let me actually sharpen this. My pencil tip is becoming blunt. And I want to make this larger. Make this larger. So the top of the lava lamp is almost like a horizontal line, okay? And then we see another horizontal line where the black portion ends. And then we see almost like a flat horizontal line, maybe with very, very subtle like curves along the edges. But for the most part, the entire upper portion is kind of a trapezoid-like shape. Why? Because it's a flat form. I mean, this is a form, but we see it as a flat shape because it is at our eye level. So there's that flatness to it because it's a profile view. Okay, so we see kind of the shape like this. This is like a trapezoid. We know that this is a cone, but because it's almost a profile view, we don't see the upper plane, we don't see the lower plane, it's not curved, right? Remember how the coffee mug, when you see it, right at your eye level, you don't see the curves. You see it as a rectangle, right? Same thing is going on right here with this part of a lava lamp. And then here at the bottom is where we actually see two cones that are connected. We know that this is a cone though, right? And this is what I was talking about before. You can decide to see this as two separate cones where the black part ends, like the black part at the top could be one cone, and that is attached to another cone, which is the orange portion. But then we see another two cones down here, and these are becoming a little bit more curved because they are going below our eye level. So here we see this, a slight curve, and then this cone at the bottom is definitely more of a pronounced curve here at the base. We definitely see a curve down here. Notice that? Now, this is a very tall object. So if you're having trouble keeping things symmetrical, the taller the object is, the more issues there are with symmetry. So what I would recommend doing is laying down a vertical somewhere within your process, probably in the beginning. What I would do would be maybe after drawing my first little trapezoid or whatever it is here, draw a line going right down the middle of that. Okay. And having the line there is going to help you stack your forms better. And I think my lava lamp is a little bit too narrow. I could maybe bring out these a little bit more. And then close, and then I can invert. So I can break this up into two parts. Remember, how many times would this fit into this? How much taller is this upper portion compared to this bottom portion, right? And then here at the bottom, the black part, I would say, is the cones making up this black base are the same height. They're the same dimensions, just that one is going downward and one is going upward, right? I think I should make it a little bit taller. Maybe I'm gonna run out of space because of this perfume bottle, but I'm gonna do what I can. And close it here somewhere with a horizontal line. And there we go. See if I have any questions. I seem to have two. The little lamp brings back memories. Now I see all the cones. Yes, my husband loves lava lamps. He has like 3. I'm probably dating myself, but I think the original idea for lava lamps is like 70s. But so I'm a millennial. I'm an older millennial. But still, lava lamps in the 90s were a lot of fun. Anyway, just make sure that you incorporate curves where you need them and that you're not flattening things out. And do realize why these right here are more of a horizontal line and these become curves. It all comes down to your vantage point and the fact that this is a taller object. So some of this object is going to fall like almost at your eye level, whereas bottom portions of the object are going to go below your eye level. So you start seeing more of that opening of the ellipse. Okay. Ellipses become more and more open the lower they get to your from your eye level. Okay. And then from here, now that everything is looking okay, if you want to turn this into a fun lava lamp, maybe I should not make these super perfect. Sometimes you get these awesome organic shapes. Let's see. Oh, Dennis, no worries. No worries at all. This recording will be available for you for whenever you want it, okay? Um, I'm glad to hear that you're motivated and that this helped. Have a wonderful weekend, Dennis, and I look forward to seeing more of your work. You're doing amazing. Okay, so all that is left are the two organic forms or structures. I really want to show you how this applies to a flower and a fruit, okay? Because we've been working on man-made objects so far, and there is a difference between drawing organic objects and drawing man-made objects. However, the principles and those things that you should pay attention to really are the same, okay? So let me go ahead and switch to this next object. This is a pear, okay? The difference between man-made objects and organic objects is that man-made objects usually are like more symmetrical. Maybe they don't have to be fully symmetrical, but they usually have more symmetry, flatter planes, more of a perfect construction. And organic objects are more irregular. They are imperfect. There are no two pears that are exactly the same. There are no two clouds that are exactly the same. No two rocks that are exactly the same. This said, you can still stem from simple forms in order to make sure that you are building on something that looks three-dimensional, right? So the same things apply. It's just that you incorporate some imperfection and irregularity and even asymmetry as you move on to refine your drawing. So when it comes to a pear, you could simplify the pear or visualize it as a sphere. It doesn't have to be a perfect sphere. This is not a perfect sphere, okay? But, start with something that looks like a sphere. And then what I like doing is placing like a cone at the top or a tapered cylinder. And for this one, okay, and it depends on the proportions of the pear. Maybe this part is larger and this part is smaller, shorter, more to the left, more to the right. But ultimately, what matters most is that from the beginning of your drawing process, you're acknowledging this as being two solid masses that are sitting one on top of the other. Okay. And you don't have to draw the lines for the sphere the way that we practiced them before. That hopefully you're going to carry that in your head, right? But you don't need to add them in. Just make sure that you're stemming from that understanding, right? That this is like a sphere and this is like a cone or a tapered cylinder. And then from here, you can go ahead and add in some of that imperfection, some of that irregularity. You don't want to make organic objects too perfect. It's going to not look natural if you do. Sometimes when it comes to organic objects, I even make things more asymmetrical, more imperfect than what I see in the reference photo. Because, I think as humans, most of us are going to naturally kind of, if you stop paying attention to the reference, you're going to start creating symmetry. You're going to start creating straight lines where they're really not. You're going to start creating patterns where they're really not. You're going to start even that kind of need to outline things so that we can more easily tell apart this area from this area, or where one element ends and the other one starts. We kind of naturally want to make things simpler for us to understand, and our brains are going to make us do that if we don't continue observing the reference photo and kind of override that instinctive pull to do things in an easier way. Okay. And so, especially when it comes to drawing and painting organic objects, you want to make sure that things are looking imperfect, because if you don't, it's very likely that things are going to start looking a little bit too organized, too perfect, too symmetrical, and so on and so forth. Okay? And sometimes when I come across a photo, the apple, the pear, whatever it is just a little bit too perfect. So I make things more crooked. Maybe my stem is a little bit like, I don't know, I make it longer, more imperfect, more crooked. If I'm adding leaves, I make sure that the leaves are some larger, some smaller, you know, just making sure that things are looking natural. Okay, and all of this is kind of a volume, and this is a volume here, and all of this would be in shadow. Okay. If you're interested in learning how I shade things, you also have videos on Patreon and on YouTube. I walk you through the entire process. I really enjoy alternative shading techniques, where it's not super smooth shading, but more kind of hatching and cross hatching and fun stuff like that. I don't really like bringing in a blending stump and super hyper realistic shading. I think I admire that. I've practiced that before. I can do it if I want to, but I just find it very boring. I find it very boring. And because I like more of a sketchy, raw look, I kind of gravitate more toward alternative shading techniques, and even pen and ink drawing I have tutorials on. So if you're into that kind of stuff, and you want to learn more about how I actually move on to develop my values once this part of the drawing process is done, I would recommend checking out my drawing tutorials. I have so many, and many more to come this year. Okay. And finally, I want to share a flower with you. And I don't know if you've ever gone to classes where you're drawing or you're painting flowers, and you hear that different flowers have different shapes or forms. Well, this goes exactly hand in hand with everything that we've been talking about today. Okay. Some flowers have more of a bowl shape, like peonies and stuff like that. Other flowers have more of a trumpet shape, like morning glories, and this particular flower that we're looking at. Don't ask me the name because I have no idea what this flower is. I'm terrible with plant names and flower names. But this flower right here in this photo has a trumpet shape. And guess what simple three-dimensional form that is? It's a cone. It's just a cone. That's all it is. Okay. So and I do have videos where I explain how to draw different types of flowers. You can find those in my channel as well, or on Patreon, and even fuller courses on Patreon as well. But anyway, so this is a cone. It's just a cone. We've been drawing many, many cones and tapered cylinders by this point. I know that it's harder because the petals are shaped in such a way that it's irregular, and you're like, oh my God, this is a different shape and all this. But the best thing that you can do is simplify the process for yourself as much as you can, and tune out the things that don't matter in the beginning. Because in the beginning, we're just focusing on proportions and on communicating form and perspective. Details are built on that. Okay. So, how can I simplify this into a trumpet? Well, I would definitely, I know that the petals are like going off into these kind of pointy tip sections, but just what would the what would the opening of the petals of the petal structure look like, right? We know that it's like an oval or an ellipse because trumpets have this oval or ellipse. And from this perspective, it's quite like this flower is one of those types of flowers that are kind of going or growing upside down. And so what I feel is that this photo was taken from beneath it, like not like a top down view or like viewing the flower from directly under it, but more of a bottom three-fourths view, right? Because if we were just underneath the flower and we were just like looking up at it, we would only see that into the flower. We would only see that circle inside of a circle. We would only see the inner part of the flower. We wouldn't see the outer planes. In this photo, we see the outer planes. So this is more of a three-fourths perspective, but we're still very much looking up at the flower. It's above us, okay? So because it is above us, we see a pretty large, prominent, like opening, okay? Maybe it's even more open than that, to be honest, but we'll see. And if I need to make any changes, I can make them along the way, okay? As long as I'm keeping my sketch light. So I start with this kind of oval for the opening of the flower. And then the back of it, I could just do this and make it into just a cone. But the fact of the matter is that this flower, like I can start my cone somewhere inside this so that I don't have to erase these lines a little bit later. Because of how the petals are structured, I can just do this, but I'm still visualizing a cone, okay? It's still a cone. All right. And then from here, now that this is looking okay, I can start turning this into a flower. So I'm going to observe the reference photo and notice any like slight changes in form that I might want to do. This comes out a little bit and then in. Let's see if I have any questions. Um, you're very welcome, December. I'm glad that you popped in, and I wish you a wonderful weekend. You're very, very welcome. Okay, so make any changes that you want to do. I don't really see how this flower connects to the kind of tree or plant. I don't really see much of that. It doesn't show in the photo, but I can end it there. And then from here, I can just kind of draw the petals alongside this initial, I'm not sure how many petals this flower has, I guess 5, but they're like overlapping over each other, so I can't see them very well. But I can just start creating the petal forms here, going up, using the oval that I already kind of laid down, right? Where does this come out? Goes out like that. And then in, and then I see another pointy. Maybe it would have been smart of me to add in the little pointy sections before trying to draw the petal shapes, because the little pointy ends tell you where the middle of each petal is. And that is a great indication of where like the where each petal is within this overall structure, because I have that middle indication, that middle like landmark. And I can also do a little like where I see the color changing from red into more of a yellowish greenish hue. kind of like that. And I can erase. You're very, very welcome, Anna. Hope this is helping a lot and that you really take these principles with you into your drawing and really see that it doesn't have to be that hard or intimidating. Drawing is so fun when you allow it to be. And it's not about perfection either. Okay. Okay, there is a color change over here as well. An irregular kind of shape there. And there's veins. I don't know if they can be called veins, but. And organic objects can be very fun because you can draw them a lot more loosely. There's a looser approach because you want to keep things imperfect and stuff. The looser approach helps you keep things more kind of imperfect and incorporate imperfections. But we're finishing up here. So if you have any last questions that you would like me to help out with, let me know, because our lesson is almost over. This video will stay up here. So if you want to come back to it, you definitely can. And remember that the references, if you joined a little bit later and you're interested in the references, see how naturally I wanted to point those two up toward the same direction, but they're not in the reference photo. See that? My brain is just telling me to do things the same way. That's not what's happening in the reference. What was I saying? Oh, yes. If you joined a little bit later and you are interested in having these reference photos that I kind of prepared for this class, for this lesson, you can go ahead and find them for free over on a Patreon post that is open. I left the link to that specific Patreon post in the top, at the top of the chat when I first started the class. Okay, you can find them there. And the downloadable attachments that or the downloadable files that I create for my tutorials are at the end of the Patreon post. You can find those attachments at the end. If you ever have any questions and you want to reach out via email, you can find me at hello@ericalancaster.com. Erica with a K, not with a C. Starting to get into a little bit of shading just to... This flower is hard because of flowers are hard in general because of the color changes involved. But yeah, so hopefully you can see how I turned that cone into a flower. So we covered a lot today. We covered quite a bit, from what simple forms you should definitely be practicing, how to practice those, why they are so important and kind of key to being able to draw anything, which was definitely my goal when I was first getting started with drawing. And not only that, but how to apply them to many different objects that we worked on together. Take these principles with you as you move forward, and I promise you that you're going to be able to develop your drawing skills a lot faster than people who don't know all of this. Okay. Let me go ahead and share myself on screen. Hi, everyone. Okay. Oh my God, I'm covered in eraser bits. Move closer to the camera and remove this remove my photo. All right. Yes, so we went over so many things today, and I really hope that this was helpful for you. I hope that it wasn't too overwhelming. I I really want to share as much as possible in my tutorials, and I've received comments before in my YouTube videos like, you could have said this in 5 minutes or whatever it is. And I am not a big fan of social media. I am on social media because my business is online and I know that I need to be on social media. And so I have forced myself to abide, or not abide by, but like working or sharing longer videos is unfortunately not good nowadays, in the sense that you will grow very, very slowly because it's not what most people want. Most people are looking for quick wins, and most people don't have the attention span nowadays, unfortunately, to sit through a class and put in the work that is needed to actually develop your skills to a higher level. But the way that I see it, learning to draw and paint are not skills that you can develop in 5 minutes. They are complex skills that involve a lot of things. And if you're looking for quick answers to very specific questions, sure, maybe a 1 minute reel or a 5 minute tutorial or even a 15-minute watercolor tutorial may answer those questions. But it will provide you a quick win. Maybe it won't. The thing as well is that sometimes you come across tutorials that are actually meant for people who are farther ahead, or might be helpful for people that are farther ahead. But for the total beginner, they tend to be very frustrating. They tend to leave you with more questions than the ones that you initially had. And they make it seem like you should be creating great looking art in 15 minutes. And I have seen that that really demotivates a lot of people just getting started, because it makes you feel like you don't have the skills or talent that you need in order to become an artist or something like that, when that is not the case at all. And so I've been on YouTube for since 2018, I think. I started getting very serious about creating content for the online space after being a teacher at a local level for a long time. And it was hard for me in the beginning to start translating what I knew into video form and tutorials. But one of the things that I am keeping is the length of my videos, because I really want to I'm I am going against the grain, even though it means growing slowly, because I want to transmit, I want to provide the things that you actually need in order to grow. I don't want to leave things out, because that can frustrate you and make you kind of set aside your art, and make you think that you don't have it in you to create great art. And I promise you that that is not the case at all. So just know that learning to draw or paint is there's a lot of stuff that goes into that, and it requires an understanding of many things and a lot of practice and a long kind of commitment to your practice. It's not something that you're going to get great at by just following a 15-minute tutorial every now and then. It's something that you have to make consistent. And sometimes, like what we went through today, drawing simple objects that you have at home from reference photos or direct observation, even if it's 15 minutes a day, but you're staying